The Bobcat fire happened in September. We really wanted to show you some of the changes that happened in Canyon Park and also some of the rehabilitation that's happening naturally in our park, in our preserve area. As you can see around our picnic grounds, the area is recovering. You can see that the grass is growing in really good and really plentiful even after the fire. And we even have a lot of our wildlife. We have some deer that's acclimated to this area because we've had less people, unfortunately, in this area. But we just wanted to show some updates and show that the wildlife is thriving and some of our plant life is revegetating on its own. We'll take you on through the waterfall trail and show you some of the updates of what's happening and why we're actually still closed for this time of period. We can see a lot of top water runoff on our streams, and the coloration is very dark. This shows that there's a lot of silt that's coming downstream, but as we get to the waterfall, we may see some changes. Another common occurrence is seeing debris flow that's coming from our slopes from erosion after the fire. It's falling onto our trails. Another great sign in our vegetation is the evidence of these trees that are sprouting from the base of the trunk. That shows that the root systems are still alive underneath this tree. Although the tree may seem to be dead on top, the roots are still alive. That's holding and stabilizing the dirt that's falling onto our trails. We do know that a lot of sediment flow came down into the canyon from our last rainstorm. We had a rainstorm about 2 weeks ago. It didn't change the canyon significantly, but it did make some changes that we could see just from first glance. One, we have our water stream that actually changed directions. Our water stream used to be on the other side of this canyon, but it's a lot more closer to us. That could be just from the way the sediment's actually just redirecting the water to where it naturally flowed in the past. We also have a lot of indications of tree burn here, obviously, but what we really want to look at is above me. We have two similar types of trees, which is the alder tree. One tree is also right now pollinating. It's a little bit more fluffier. It has a lot of light green to tannish color. And then the tree that's a little bit closer to me that's the same is a tree that's perished. We see that there's no production going on in the leaves or any kind of what we call catkins that pollinates the next generation of trees to come. But there's a lot of different things if we look closely to why, if we have a high tree that is not alive or more perished, we don't know when those are going to fall. So we always want to make sure that we're coming in here with a lot of hazards in mind. we have to determine and assess if these trees are going to be taken out or not. We don't want to have any of these trees here in harm's way when we open up to the public. So it's another reason why we're still closed off to the public. All these trees that are laying into the stream bed, these actually came down from our recent rains. It's hard to imagine that the rain actually covered all the way from where I'm standing all the way across the canyon, about where the sediment flow is. And with that sediment flow came a lot of trees that came down. The power of water was so significant that I actually brought these trees and actually bunched them up here in this to the left of me. And that shows that there's a significant amount of trees that are still falling and continue to fall. Another thing we wanted to point out is what we call widowmakers. Widowmakers is a term when there's a significant branch or tree that's vulnerable and ready to fall. And we see that continually happening on our waterfall trail post Bobcat fire. You can see that there's numerous trees and branches falling. And we know that this didn't happen during the fire. During the fire, if there was any kind of trees or branches that were on the ground, they burned up immediately. So everything that we see on the floor bed of our canyon that was in a burned area, such as where I'm standing right now, all the trees and branches that are falling that can give significant damage, that's what we call widowmakers. These trees and branches are vulnerable because they were succumbed to the fire. They maybe have made it through the first pass, but we're really not quite sure when they can fall at any time on top of us, around us. It takes a couple of seasons for those vulnerable branches to come down. We have to keep a close eye on that. Some of them are also hanging and they haven't quite detached yet, so we want to make sure if we can get those down so they can avoid hitting anybody, we also want to do that as well. One of the things that is really dangerous on our single track trails, primarily most of the waterfall trail, are some of these boulders that are falling down. And this obviously is a very significant sized boulder that came down from our last recent rains. And on top of that, we also get smaller boulders as well, not just the big ones, and these can do a lot of damage if it's in harm's way. So we want to make sure that a lot of these are assessed and making sure that we're getting people on hiking trails that are very safe. But these are continually going to come falling the next season or so, and we have to really wait till the summertime to see when all of them do finally come down after our winter season, because winter and spring is the time where most of these do tend to fall. On top of that, we have continual, you can see the topography of where I'm standing. It's a little bit different. It's not so flat. It's because we had a lot of runoff with sediment, and we don't really want people to walk over this because it is a trip hazard. And just below us, we can see you can fall for quite a distance and really injure yourself. And this is very continuous, as you see on the video as we walk up, that there's constant what we call slough piles that are on the single track trail that we have to maneuver over. So not really a safe environment until we get this cleared as well.
As we look above, we can see that the trees look pretty bare, but if we look closer, we can see that there's a lot of life that's about to happen this coming spring. The branches are starting to sprout out new leaves, and as we go onto the slope over here, we can see polypody ferns starting to sprout out and fiddle. This is a great sign that there's a lot of life ready to come back to Canyon Park. As we look up at our canopy again, we can see that there's a lot of toasted leaves on our canopy and our tree cover. But rest assured, this will all come back and we see a lot of life coming out into the branches with new leaf sprouts. And as we look into our stream bed, we can see how much debris has actually came down from our canyons. This is all sediment flow that's came from our last rain event, but we will eventually recover this with a lot of vegetation that will naturally come back.
So one area we wanted to also talk about, this area was known as what we called the cathedral. We're only about a quarter mile away from the waterfall, so we're pretty close. But this area was known to have a very flat area. We called it the cathedral because there were a lot of oak trees and bay trees that kind of hovered over in an arch. Kind of like a cathedral church. It was kind of mimicked, and that's why it was nicknamed that. Obviously things have changed since our Bobcat fire and our sediment flow from our rainfall. The topography in this area is a little different. We see more of a gradual slope where before it was a little bit more horizontal and flat. And obviously a lot of our trees have fallen around us. It's mainly about 2 trees that kind of broke off and fell because they were fire damaged, and the roots actually burned from within and kind of carved out the bark. The base of the tree was so weak it actually just toppled over and fell, and that's what we're seeing behind us too. We do have a lot more trees in this manner that have that kind of that stress on it to where we don't know if it's going to hold up or not, so we have to do those assessments on our trees to make sure that, you know, they're not going to fall at any given time. Obviously we want to make sure that all these trees are cleared as well too. We don't want people climbing under it or over them, so we want to make sure those are cleared as well too. So one of the natural features we had in Canyon Park was what we call the limbo log. And the limbo log is actually the log that I'm standing right behind. This log was a natural feature that it grew out and it fell over and grew out sideways, very horizontally, to where people were able to limbo under it. We had a lot of school groups. We used to tell the kids to limbo under the log because it was just low enough for them to get under there. A lot of people that visited Canyon Park would also sit on top of this log and take a really nice Polaroid moment, a nice photo feature for this. It was a very special log to a lot of people. I'm glad we still have a little bit of it left. I think it could still be a natural feature for our public. But unfortunately during the Bobcat fire, half of it did burn and it did turn over to the side. So it's not quite horizontal anymore. But I'm glad we still have a little bit of remembrance from our limbo log, and I'm sure a lot of people will keep sharing that memory with us when they come to visit Canyon Park.
We may see some slight changes in our stream bed, but rest assured, even though there was a lot of sediment flow in this area, revegetation will come back naturally, and this place will be just as beautiful as it was before the fire.
So one of the more significant changes that happened near the waterfall is probably around this area and leading up to the waterfall. This area was known as, we called it always the bear cave. There's an impression inside this granite wall which made it lead to believe that this was a cave, but it's too shallow for a cave and bears wouldn't really sleep in that area. But it was a nice nickname that people identified with.
The area that we're looking at here shows a log that's in our stream bed. Now this didn't initially burn during the fire and this fell after the fire happened, but we can see the force of water of how these boulders are piled up. As the water came down from our last rain event, you can see that the rocks were just pushed down with so much force and rolling down the stream and eventually jammed against this log. And as you can see with the size of these boulders, a lot of force was able to create this big pile of boulders, and shows how strong the force of water is. So it's quite amazing what we're actually seeing here after the fire and the rain events.
So we made it to our waterfall, and as you can see from our trip up to hiking up to the waterfall in our video, there's a lot of sediment buildup in this area. We have some good news with that though. As we were coming up, you could see a lot of the sediment being carved away from our natural water flow, and that's a good sign showing that all this sediment is actually getting pushed downstream. Up here at the water is a lot more clear than how it was below, which shows that it's starting to clear up and there's not as much debris flowing down from our natural water source. We did see a little bit of change in this area. We have a lot of sediment buildup, but with natural erosion and enough water systems that come through here, enough rain events, we will reclaim our waterfall back, and that's really good news for us because it didn't really change too much of our landscape. We are still on post-fire, so we are still closed to the public, unfortunately. But the city website, and the city Instagram, and the city Facebook page has a lot of information on what happened during the Bobcat fire and what we're doing post-Bobcat fire to rehabilitate Canyon Park. Canyon Park's Instagram is also going to be rebuilding, and we're going to be bringing some posts to you soon. Hopefully in the near future we'll show you the process of our rehabilitation and how our natural area is revegetating and the wildlife is repopulating naturally on its own. So we're really excited about that as well.